Okay, so I came across this verse in my own devotionals and things like that as I'm meeting with God, trying to uproot things that I do not want to come into agreement with, that I do not want to be rooted inside of me. And when I came across this verse, I was actually looking into praying the full armor of God over me. I like to do that every day. We just need to armor up as believers. I think that's an incredibly important thing to do is fully equip ourselves to go to battle in the spirit because we fight against not flesh and blood, the spirits, the principalities. If you know the Bible, you know that verse. But this verse is what came to me. I'm going to read it to you guys. It's Ephesians 6:20, and it says, "For which I am an ambassador in chains, that in proclaiming it I speak boldly as I ought to speak." And I was like, what does that mean? Ambassador in chains. What does that even mean? And I realized that in what I was studying, that Paul is speaking out boldly as the envoy of the King of Kings. He is sharing his message regardless that he's shackled up by Rome. He, like the Roman guards, regardless, he is proclaiming it. So it's like, if he can do that in shackles, in chains, we can do that in our businesses. We can do that in our leadership. We can stand on that truth in our leadership. And when we stand on something like that, something that's a cornerstone, that's foundational for us, it seeps into our identity. And that's what we want. We want it to seep into our identity, because there is a war on our identity. The enemy comes in to steal it away. And when your identity is stolen away, you can't come into agreement with what God has for you. And uprooting those limiting beliefs, uprooting all of those mindsets and all of those experiences and childhood survival strategies that you went through as a child. We don't know. We just adapt to whatever's going on. And unfortunately, though, those things and experiences get rooted in deep inside of us, and we take it on as our held identity. And our held identity is different than our God given identity. Our held identity is what we think it is, what we believe it is through our experiences, our childhood, our traumas, or whatever it is, the market, the industry's market, all of it. You come into agreement with things of this world is basically what our held identities are. And they look a little different for everyone, of course. And we are all unique. And it's really cool because we're still unique, even in what God has for us and what He calls us. He still has something unique that He calls only you. He may call all of us wonderfully made, but that is true, but He also has something that's uniquely for you, which is why I'm such an advocate for praying and asking God for that, to see what is that? What do you want me to know? Because when you repeat that in the mirror and you say that over your life, over your business, over your leadership, you come out of agreement with those old things, with that held identity. You come out of agreement with the hidden root rot. And once you come out of agreement with those things, that's when God can work, because we put Him in a box otherwise. And we end up being restricted by what the world says about our businesses, or what the market says. And we put all of our faith in that. Why do we put all of our faith, all of it, in what the world says instead of what God says? So what would it look like in your business if God was your source? Not your experiences, not the numbers, the logic, the realism, the blueprints and the strategies and the what the market says. No matter what is going on in your outside circumstances, you're still who God says you are in here. And I love that verse because it kind of speaks on that. And I want to read something to you guys really quick. So if we upgrade our identity, I wrote this down, so bear with me for just a second. If we upgrade our identity from surviving and doing what the world says to commissioned, and doing what God says. That's what changes everything. Because the worldly chain is going to look like, it's going to look like, it's when you have a business hurdle, a profit plateau, or things like that, a slow launch, a client pushback, cash flow dips, or anything like that, a sign of, it sends us a sign of restriction and failure. But what does God say? You know, what if we were to frame it in what he says? And I would like to say that would be the ambassador alignment, the realignment. So your current circumstances do not dictate your calling. It doesn't dictate who you are inside. If Paul could command spiritual authority chained to a Roman guard, your business, your leadership can shatter marketplace strongholds, regardless of the economic climates. The hurdles are just chains that God will use to display his sovereignty and backing. So if you think about it that way, think about it as, okay, the market's putting you in a box. It's putting you in a box. It's putting your business in a box. All of it. It's you're coming to agreement with what the world says. What if instead you let God do it and show up? How would that look in your business? We've got to come out of agreement with those limiting beliefs and thinking there won't be enough if you charge premium, thinking that you'll lose clients if you charge premium. Whatever it is, there's all kinds of seeds that get planted inside of us. We can never, ever, ever be driven by the numbers. The numbers tell us things. When I say the blueprints and strategies and things, drop those, send them out the door, I'm not saying that they are not helpful, but they shouldn't be what we put our foundation. It's not the foundation of our leadership and our business. We're not going to stand firm on what the world says. We'll stand firm on what God says. God is responsible for our provision. And if we come into agreement with what he says about us, what he says about our business and our leadership, and uproot those limiting beliefs, uproot those lies that we tell ourselves, uproot that's when we can step into fully charging for the full value of the work we provide. That's when you can charge premium prices. Otherwise, you're going to limit yourself because of your market. You're going to be chained to what the world says. So if you step out boldly instead of out of fear and scarcity or whatever it is, step out boldly and declare that God is the one who has the victory. God is where our foundation is. No, nothing else. And as visionaries, you're a visionary, you're an entrepreneur, you're a leader in your field, and we are held to a different standard. So let's make that standard known in the business world. There's a gap here. There's still a war on identity going on. A spiritual war on identity. And it's in our businesses too. They affect our businesses, and it affects our businesses in many, many ways. And in the rooted experience, that's what we do. We uproot those things that we don't want anymore. We don't need them. They were planted by our experiences, our childhood, what other people say, influences, entertainment, the world, the market, blueprint strategies, having perfectionism, all of it. Everything is a seed that was planted, and it churns and it points you in a direction that you don't want to go. You want your compass to be pointed at God all the time, every single time. You don't want it to be off kilter in any sort of way. And because that's when you start coming into agreement with things that will not further your business, that will not bust you through those profit plateaus or ceilings. What if you have the audacity to 10x your prices right now? Because God said that you're worth that. You're worth it because of what you bring to the table. What is it? What does 10xing your prices look like? What does that make you feel inside? Do you feel crunchy? Do you feel scared? Do you feel that flutter? What's going on inside? I want to know. Let me know down in the comments. And also join the Rooted community, where I send out newsletters and things like that. And so we can be in community together, because that's how we change. That's how we get built up and encouraged. And we love Jesus in this community, and we serve him, and we break the chains of the market and what the world says. That's how we succeed. That's how we have an unshakable shield. That's where abundance and wealth come from to further the kingdom. Because sometimes what you're called to do, well, all the time, what you're called to do is to serve. So all your gifting, all your everything inside of you is built to serve the kingdom for God, to bring other people in. So I encourage you to think about it for a minute. What would it look like in your leadership if you looked inside instead of externally, to bust through that profit ceiling, to bust through the plateau, the 10K months, the 20K months? Because, I remember at some point, to me, that sounded like a lot. I'm like, oh, 10K month, that's awesome. The highest of the lowest is still the low. So sometimes we just got to be bold, and it doesn't make you greedy. Stand on integrity and what God has for you and what he wants you to charge.